Today, we are going to talk about software security. This is actually, as I said when we introduced the course, this is actually a core portion of the course, one of the portions of the course that we care most about. And at the end of the day, the reason why we care most about it is one, because we like to hack things. So hacking software is one of the things that we like to do. But two, one of the reasons why we really love this part of the course is the fact that at the end of the day, you would be justified if you thought that most of the vulnerabilities that we deal with are, in the end, at least partially software vulnerabilities. So software vulnerabilities are kind of the root cause of many, if not most, of the security issues that we face in computer science. So let's start by the fundamentals. What does it mean to create secure software? Well, from lesson 1, we know that there is no such thing as secure software. There's no such thing as secure anything. There's things that are secure enough. In other words, using a term that is borrowed from safety engineering, we don't really want software to be perfect, but we want software to have a high assurance, to give us a guarantee that it can actually perform at the level of efficiency that is needed for the task it is being used for. So what does good software look like? Well, you have taken classes in software engineering. So my colleagues from software engineering will probably kill me for oversimplifying this and actually ending also up on video with this. But basically, good software engineering means creating software that meets the requirements. Requirements can be, as you will remember, both functional or non-functional. A functional requirement basically, and once again, I'm oversimplifying, a functional requirement means that the software actually does what it has been designed to do. So it actually helps you perform some functions. Non-functional requirements are kind of horizontal requirements that apply to all types of software. They are implicit requirements. When you design a software, for instance, you want the software to be usable. That's not a specific requirement. In some cases, they are specific, explicit requirements. But in most cases, you kind of imply, when you are designing a software, that you will design the software so that it is usable by people, by the type of people it has been designed for. So of course, MATLAB is kind of usable for the type of people that tend to use MATLAB, which is not the regular average computer user. Software needs to be usable, needs to be safe, needs to be performant. And also, another non-functional requirement is security. Rarely, when you design software, you will see users, end users, when you do requirement elicitation, when you gather requirements from the users. Rarely users will say that software needs to be secure. Maybe they say that, but they don't go in depth on that. They just assume that when you design software, you will also design it to be secure. Secure enough, of course, in our tradition. So creating applications that are inherently secure, that have been designed so that they are secure, is part of the skill set of software engineers. That's what you expect software engineers to be able to do. Actually, a number of years ago, I have witnessed, I was a PhD student at the time, so there were like dinosaurs still going around in the parks around the Politecnico. But I witnessed an exchange of ideas between one of my most senior and esteemed colleagues, Giovanni Vigna, who took his PhD here at Politecnico and now is a professor at University of California, Santa Barbara, and Carlo Ghezzi, who you probably know, a senior professor of software engineering here at Politecnico, his former advisor. And Giovanni, who was already a professor at the time, was giving a talk. And at some point, Carlo interrupted him and said, well, but basically, at the end of the day, what you are saying is that if we were able to design software correctly, all of these things that you work on, all of this security stuff, would just go away. And that's actually precisely the point. Software security is a problem of design. We would be able to solve that problem. The point is that designing software that actually does what it's supposed to do turns out to be very hard. Witness all of the patches, all of the new releases of software that we use every day. It's very hard to solve this problem. It is true that if this problem were solved, we would have software with no inherent security vulnerabilities. But it turns out that doing that is actually very hard, which is lucky for people like me and Giovanni, because it means that security will give us job security for a lifetime. So we said that software should implement its specifications. It should meet the requirements, and it should implement specifications. Whenever you have software that has an unmet specification, you call that unmet specification a bug. Whenever that unmet specification is related to a security requirement, that bug is a vulnerability. We have seen a more general definition of vulnerability: defects in protection systems that allow someone, a threat agent, to execute a threat and to actually violate the constraints of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. That's our general definition of a vulnerability. In particular, in software, a vulnerability turns out to be a bug that has a reflex on confidentiality, integrity, and or availability of the software. And once again, as we said in the very first classes, an exploit, which is a term that comes from the French, it should be read exploit, but actually we imported it back through the Americans, so we read it in the American way, exploit. An exploit is a way, it is the recipe, it is the set of instructions for abusing that software vulnerability and obtaining something that we should not be able to obtain. Knowing the vulnerability is not the same as knowing the exploit. You will remember the example we made with lock picking and the vulnerability of locks. We can know the vulnerability and not be able to pick the lock. We can actually be taught how to pick the locks without being told what the vulnerability is. Now, in order to give you a few examples in the following, I will take as a base description Unix. But all of the things that I'm going to say are very general. It's just that I needed to pick an example. Also, the examples that you will see are very much like pseudocode. So even if they are Unix, Linux examples written in C, you can actually read them as pseudocode. It's not important what is actually written in the code. The important thing is the message behind it. Okay? So just as a way to bring everyone up to speed, if you are not a Linux user, maybe you don't remember these things, even if we have already touched on them during the course, you may or may not remember that in Unix-like systems, in Linux in particular, every file has a user that is its owner. And this user, that is its owner, can actually modify the privileges of that file. So in that first example over there, user foo, in green, is the owner of the executable that is called aptly executable. So it's an executable file. The privileges of user foo are the privileges that you see in the first set of 3 privileges over there. Privileges in Unix are in triplets: read, write, and execute. So that series of triplets over there reads like the user foo, which is the owner, can read, write, and execute this file. The users in the group can read and execute this file. Everybody else can read and execute the file. Okay, so everyone can execute the file. User foo can execute the file, but can also read or write the content of the file. When you run a process, the process can perform some actions. These actions are restricted by the user the process is being run with. This owner of the process, this user owner of the process, is called the real UID, RUID. That's the user that is being used, basically, for checking permissions for what the file can or cannot do. So if I am user bar, see that line over there, it says that I'm user bar, and I execute the executable, I'm not user foo, who is the owner. I'm user bar. Executable will run with the privileges of user bar, the privileges of me that I have launched the program, not with the privileges of its original owner. That's pretty normal, right? That's what you kind of expect. If you think about it, I am user bar. Any file that I launch, any program that I launched on my machine, you kind of expect that it will respect the privileges that I have. Obviously, this is not possible every single time. There are some programs that need more privileges than the privileges I have in order to be executed. Let's pick a very simple example. Ping, the ping command. You have all used it to test your connectivity. Any user on the system should be able to run ping, probably. It's a very simple command. It has some security implications, but let's leave those alone. It's a very simple, basic program that you probably want every user on the system to be able to run. However, in order to execute, ping needs to create a type of packet that is called ICMP. That type of packet under Linux can only be created and intercepted back by root. So in order to execute its functions, ping, the very simple ping command, needs root privileges. Any program that needs to bind a port that is lower than 1024 on Linux needs root privileges. But you don't want to have root run all of those programs, or to give the root password or a root privileges to all the users on the system, right? So what you want to do is actually, or rather, how you solve this problem under Linux is actually give to the program the ability to get more privileges than the user running them. So normally, the real user ID, the user ID of who launched the program, is the same as the so-called effective user ID, the user ID that is used to check the privileges. But in some specific cases, you may want a program to have an effective user ID different, higher in privileges, than the privileges of the user running it. Basically, you want to give a user that is not root the ability of do some specific thing that only root can do. How this is done on Linux-like systems? It is done by using a concept called a set user ID, saved user ID. A saved user ID can be used to change the effective user ID at runtime. So if we have our program that is called executable still, but we change it by using the command change mod, so saying that this is set user ID, what we are saying this here is that this program is set user ID to its owner, which is foo. When bar executes the program actually executes with the privileges of user foo. This is not exactly what we wanted. We wanted the program to be able to do a specific thing with those higher privileges. But it's getting closer. How do we actually get to what we wanted to do? Let's look at a simple example code. So this is a very simple piece of code that just prints out the real user ID and the effective user ID of a program. It uses two calls, getUID and getEUID, that return those two values. So if you compile and execute this program, and this program is owned and set with the root, is owned by the user root, and it's saved user ID. So basically, when it will be run, we expect it to have the privileges of root. What is going to happen in your opinion? What's going to happen when we run this program? What are going to be the real user ID and the effective user ID? Whoa, silence. It's difficult to answer in front of a camera, right? OK, for today, we will give up our interactive classroom a bit. So what we expect to happen is that even if I run this program as non-root, those real user ID and effective user ID will be set to 0. So let's see what happens, actually. We run it, and surprisingly, we get as real user ID 501, which is the user ID of foo. As effective user ID, we get 0, which is the user ID of root. So we now know what happens when a program is set UID. It starts with the user ID of the user it is set UID to. But this is not what we wanted originally. What we wanted originally is that this program, we wanted this program to be able to change its privileges to just perform a simple operation. Well, it turns out, such as in this case, for instance, we wanted to be able to open a file that is only readable by root. Actually, /etc/secret is an example. It could be any other file that is only readable by root. So if we run the program, even if we are user foo, but the program is set UID root, we run the program runs with our real user ID, but with effective user ID root, and it is able to extract information from a secret file. Now, what we want is to be able to do this, and then to drop the privileges. So to be able to do with the privileges of root only a specific operation. Turns out that if you are inside a program that is saved user ID, you can drop the privileges. You can tell from inside the program, OK, I'm done using the higher privileges. Let's go back to the privileges of the original user that has launched the program. Why would I want to do that? Why would I want the program to lose privileges? I have done the thing that I designed the program to do with those privileges. Why now I want the program to be able to lose the privileges? Nobody? Come on. Fair enough. I want the program to be able to lose the privileges because I want to be sure that if something happens, the program does not have higher privileges than the user, except for the specific amount of time, for the specific set of instructions that need those higher privileges. Let's see the reason why. Let's see the reason why. So this is totally pseudocode. This is not C anymore. So take away all the clutter. Just focus on the idea. So we have this program that is vulnerable, as it says on the top of the slide. We have this program, and this program does this. It starts with a high level of privileges. It starts and ends with a high level of privileges. It doesn't change privileges at all. It starts with the privileges of a saved user, say root. So it starts. It reads a configuration file that is passed on the command line. It parses it. And then, if the parsing has gone well, starts and does its own things. If parsing fails, it prints out an error message. OK? Very simple thing. We don't care about what the program does. It's just the initialization of the program. So what happens if I pass to this program as a configuration file a file that can only be read by root. What's going to happen there? What's going to happen is that it is going to be able to actually read it, because it has the root privileges. It will process this file, which is not its configuration file. It's something else. And it will say, whoops, nope, this is not my configuration file, and print out an error. Something like that. Error in file, line 1, and then out comes the first line of a file we are not supposed to read. If it's /etc/shadow, that's the shadow file with the passwords of users on Linux. Okay? File that you are not supposed to read as a regular user, because it contains the hash of the passwords of users. Line 1 would be the hash of the root password. So if this seems like, you know, the kind of usual made-up example that Professor Zanero puts on the slides, this is actually, I took away a lot of stuff, but this is actually a real vulnerability that was present in X, the window manager of Unix and Linux, until a lot of versions ago. It's actually an old vulnerability. But this vulnerability was there, exactly like this. It would take the privileges and read the files, whereas instead, the configuration file should be read with the privileges of the user running it. I heard someone say, I didn't understand. Is this person willing to and able to raise their hand? I heard it. Go ahead. So what was the question?
The folder set the UID.
Mm-hmm.
Does it change the EUID or the RUID?
It changes the EUID. So basically, when you said set UID, you're basically changing the effective UID that is going to be used for checking the privileges. You cannot change it globally. There are rules that state how you can change, how you can transition from one to another. They are too complex for this classroom, so they are not needed for the example. So I go over the example again so that I can explain better why it's a problem. So basically, this program needs to do some things here. In order to do these things, it needs privileges. Say, this is X, the window manager. It's not the window manager, Windows server, but that's the same. It needs to talk with the video card. In order to talk with the video card, it needs to have privileges. So in order to do those things in do things, it needs to have privileges. That's right. When it reads configuration files, though, it should run as the normal user that has run it. That's not the privileged thing that it was set UID for. We set the set UID in order to allow it to do things, not to allow it to read files. If we start setting the high privileges of root at the beginning of the execution, what is going to happen is that when it reads this configuration, it's going to apply the privileges of root, not the privileges of user Stefano that is running it. So the result is that it's going to be able to read any file in the system, and it will spit out, as an error, the contents of the files in the system. So this is a vulnerability. We are violating the confidentiality of a file that we are not supposed to read. I am Stefano. I am running an executable and getting a piece of a file that only root can read. How do we solve this vulnerability? How do we fix the program? We basically put the program, the effective user ID of the program, at the level of the real user ID. So we don't have the privileges. We read the configuration file. Then we do the things. Before doing the things, we get the saved user ID, so the higher privileges that we need in order to do the things. Now, if we do it this way, what is going to happen if Stefano runs the executable? What is going to happen is that when I try to access that file that is accessible only by root, this read instruction, or rather function, is going to be called with my privileges on a file that I cannot read, and the program is going to fail because permission to read that file is going to be denied. This is the expected behavior. I'm not able to read the file. This is unexpected behavior. I'm able to read the file. Now, actually, this is still not correct. Can you spot why this is still not correct? Any idea? There's 3 functions over there, pseudocode functions. Read the file, parse the file, do the things. When do we need the root privileges? When we do the things. Do we need root privileges for parsing the file? No, I didn't specify that. We may need them, but in my specifications of this pseudocode, we didn't say that. If we don't need the root privileges for parsing the file, and it's very rare that we need privileges in order to just parse some text, that instruction over there is wrong because we are acquiring the root privileges before parsing the file. So if in the parser routine there is a bug, there is a vulnerability, there is something that has been ill-designed, the end result is going to be that we are going to be able to break this routine, and when we break it, the program has the privileges. If instead we do the things the right way, so we acquire the privileges immediately before doing things, and we drop them immediately after doing things, what are we doing? We are decreasing the so-called attack surface of the system. We are decreasing the parts of the system that can break everything. Okay? Is this clear enough? It's just an example, just pseudocode. In the rest of the classes regarding software security in the following days, we are going to look at several examples, several real instances of this, so that may help make everything a little bit clearer. Okay, so is there anything, questions, doubts? Okay, so I'll move along by looking at this graph that I show over here. And this is a graph of known software vulnerabilities. I actually took it from a database that is called the National Vulnerability Database, maintained by NIST, the National Institutes of Standards and Technology. But remember, these vulnerability databases are collections, okay? They are collections that are gathered from different sources. So whichever database you look at, whichever data source you use, you will find slightly different numbers. But we are not interested in the real numbers. We are just interested in the trends. So whatever database you look at, you will see the same trends, more or less. So here we have the number of vulnerabilities in the database. So of course, it's the number of vulnerabilities per year. It's not incremental, because otherwise this would not explain how the database looks like. It's the number of vulnerabilities per year. Per year they have been disclosed. And I start the graph from 88, and I end the graph in 2013, because that's actually the year I dumped. So don't look at this last item, because that's falsified by the way I took this picture. Just look at this last line here. Okay? So up to 2012. Now, we can see different things happening in this database. We can see that there are very little, not to say zero, before the end of 90s. This is the end of 90s. Why was that? Was there no vulnerable software before the end of 90s? Well, the database was not there, for one. It has been created afterwards. But they collected back all the things that they found. So that's not the reason, of course. There were vulnerabilities before the end of the 90s. There's always been vulnerabilities. There will always be vulnerabilities. So what can be the reason there? Why are there no disclosures of vulnerabilities before the end of the 90s? Well, what happened before was that people that were looking at software and finding vulnerabilities would not really disclose them publicly. Vulnerabilities were mostly discussed among interested people. You can call them hackers, or you can call them software security experts. There was no such definition at the time. So, but these vulnerabilities would be found, used, would be traded. So people would trade vulnerabilities, trade knowledge, as if they were trading like game cards. They would trade vulnerabilities, they would trade knowledge, they would trade secrets. They were like, you know, the small secret, the trick of the magician. Okay? So, of course, there were people that were doing this playfully and people that were doing this more evilly. But still, that's what happened. Then at some point, at the end of the 90s, something started. I marked it down as disclosure. Basically, what happened were 3 different things at the same time. First thing, 1996, 1997, the beginning of the commercial internet era. Lots of people connecting to the internet. It was not just a few Unix boxes in universities and companies that had access to the global network. It began to be an access distributed to all people. So the cat of insecurity got out of the bag, as the Americans would say. People that were trading in security vulnerabilities, that knew security vulnerabilities, began to feel uncomfortable about those vulnerabilities being there and being in so widespread use around the world. So what happened was that people slowly began to press vendors into fixing those things. Because at the time, there could be a vulnerability around for maybe 2 years, and the vendor would maybe not care about fixing it. Because, you know, as long as few people knew about it, it didn't seem like a huge risk. There wasn't the culture. Right now, it's unthinkable. It's inconceivable. We look at all of the disclosure. Right now, when there is a vulnerability in a very common operating system, it actually ends up on the newspaper. Probably described in a way that makes my hair raise over my skin. But still, it appears in the newspaper. At the time, this was not there. There was not this conception. So this conception appeared through the use of so-called disclosure. You went to the vendor and said, hey, look, this is your diamond on your software, and it's actually vulnerable. It's been vulnerable for 1 year. Maybe it's high time you fix it. And the vendor will say, well, sod off. I don't care. Or, hey, I sue you. That was the other possible answer. So the mechanism by which vendors were pressured into responding was called disclosure. There were a few mailing lists. The most notable was called Bug Track, where people would disclose bugs they found in software and say, hey, this is the bug. Now do whatever you want with it until the guys over there fix it. This was, of course, a very hardline approach to software vendors. Vendors did not react very positively to it because it changed a lot. It put on them pressures. It created for them a whole lot of new work in responding to security vulnerabilities. So the full disclosure movement, you can see it in the boom of disclosures being revealed every year. Why? Because there was also other things that were happening at the same time. The security field at the time was mostly based on, policies, procedures, It was mostly a governance type, regulation type thing. All these hackers, all these security experts breaking software, showing how the software did not work correctly, were a new thing. It was a new field. That created, single-handedly, terms like penetration testing. Testing a system by trying to see if it breaks. It was not a commercial term before the end of the 90s. The first penetration testing firms out of the late 90s. Now it's a kind of a global business. If you look for penetration testing on Google and you exclude the obvious results that have nothing to do with computer security, you will find a lot of companies offering these services. Ethical hacking, security assessment, penetration testing, call it as you like. It's actually a thing. Back in the day, this created the thing. This created the field of security in software. This created the pressure to create release and updates. Update cycle, right now, we have systems that update automatically. We have vendors that have like a patch Tuesday when they release the patches every month so that you know and you can prepare because when the patches are out, you want to apply them. So all of this stuff has been born out of those years of disclosure. Because disclosure is a powerful weapon. If you go to the vendor and say, hey, this thing is broken, they can tell you, well, shut up, I don't care, and by the way, if you say that loud, I will sue you. But if you go publicly on public record and say, okay, this thing is broken, I'm blowing the whistle, as the Americans will say, I am flagging this for the public to know because this is dangerous. Then it's different. You are placing them on the spot. It's not like the vendors liked it too much. In fact, this is an email from year 2000 that has been sent by my friend Ivan Arce. Actually, it's funny. I have held this class a number of years, but this will be the first time that the people that I mentioned will probably be able to look at it on YouTube, so I better be careful what I say about them. So honestly, guys, I was always so nice to you, even when I was not filmed. Sorry, I had to say that. So Ivan, in this email, is discussing with Microsoft. So I give you the background on this incident. It's very long, so you can go and click on those two links that I have on the bottom of the slide. They are basically a link to the original thread of emails, if you want to look at, and a link to a description of the incident, a summary, in Italian, actually. So you can look at the summary or look at the whole incident. So this incident is related to a famous incident that happened to Microsoft back in the days. They basically had their own web server. They still have it, Internet Information Services, IIS. And IIS language of preference was ASP at the time, not ASP.NET, which is the version currently, but ASP. So basically, it turned out that in one of the components of IIS, there was a backdoor. There was a secret string that if you sent it to the server, would cause the server to send you back not the page interpreted from ASP, but the ASP source code, which is not good. Okay? Now, that's already bad. Having a backdoor in your source code is already pretty bad. The worst thing was what the backdoor was, what the backdoor passphrase was. And the backdoor passphrase was, Netscape engineers are weenies. So I will not translate weenies in Italian because of being on the, on the record here. But so having a backdoor in your product is bad. Having a backdoor that calls the main competitors, engineers, weenies, is actually worse, if possible. The worst thing happened when already in full damage control from the Microsoft side, Ivan and his company came up and said, well, you know, there's also a series of buffer overflows, a series of vulnerabilities in that DLL. So even if you take away the backdoor side, it's also very bad code. And Microsoft came up on the record saying, no, this is not a vulnerability. This is actually, it's not a backdoor. It's not a vulnerability. It's actually blah. And at the end of this discussion, there were actually accusations to Ivan and this company to having done, you know that in the US, there is a principle, the First Amendment, that protects speech. You can say whatever you like, with very few exceptions. And one of the only exceptions is, and it's exemplified by saying, well, you can say whatever you like, but if you yell fire in a crowded classroom like this, and people stampede to get out and someone gets killed because of the rush, then you are responsible for it. That's not protected by your First Amendment right. If you say something that creates immediate harm, that's not protected speech. So, and in here is going back to Microsoft and saying, well, it's true. If someone yells fire and it's not true, then that you can hold that person responsible for yelling fire. But when someone yells fire, you'd better check that there is no fire before actually saying, I'll sue you. Because, and that's the final phrase, excuse me if I'm being rude, but I'm shocked by the fact that our company is being blamed, is being questioned, because we found a bug. And that summarizes the relationship between vendors and discoverers of bugs in those early days of disclosure, okay? A very conflictual relationship. You had the vendors that wanted to look like, no, our software is not vulnerable. And so they saw these disclosures as being damaging to their reputation. And they were. They doubtlessly were. But over the years, the tide was just so high that they couldn't actually respond by threatening to sue every single Ivan Arce, every single bug discoverer in the world. So what happened was that, well, we will see in a little while what happened afterwards. But let's just look at the life cycle of vulnerabilities to try to understand the shift that happened in the behavior of vendors. So this is what we think happens with a vulnerability. At some point, someone makes a mistake, commits a line of code, creates a security vulnerability. The security vulnerability is shipped out with the product, and it's there. Nobody knows about it, but it's there. At some point, somebody is going to find it. Who's this somebody? Well, this somebody can be the vendor itself, find the vulnerability, patch it in the next release, nobody ever found it, it's fine. It can be somebody that reports the vulnerability to the vendor, or it can be somebody that does not report the vulnerability to the vendor. If it's somebody that does not report the vulnerability to the vendor, we have a term for that vulnerability and its exploit. We call it a 0 day. It's an exploit and a vulnerability that is known to someone, but not to everybody else. And it can be used against systems. And since the vendor and everybody else that is using that system does not know about it, there's no way to defend against it. You have the system, it's vulnerable, somebody knows, but the vendor does not know, everybody else does not know, so you have that system facing the internet, and you don't know that it's vulnerable, but it is, and those people that are in the know, those people that know the 0 day, can actually penetrate the system. Okay? So when there is an exploit in the wild, there is the possibility of so-called 0 day attacks, attacks that happen before you know. Then at some point, the vulnerability is going to be discovered by the vendor. How? Either the vendor themselves discover it, or someone else discovers the vulnerability independently and reports it to the vendor. Then the vendor starts damage control mode, creates a patch, a solution for the vulnerability, and releases the patch. The patch is released. Also, at some point, someone who has discovered the vulnerability is going to publicly disclose it. When this is publicly disclosed, people can begin to take countermeasures. For instance, maybe an antivirus vendor can release a signature for detecting the use of that specific exploit code. Or maybe I know that I have that system is vulnerable, the patch is not out yet, I take that system offline. I put a firewall in front of it and shield it from the internet for a little time. Okay? I know that there is a vulnerability, I can do something to defend against it. So, in your opinion, in this sequence, of course, these things can happen in different sequences. But in this sequence, where the risk is highest? Well, the risk is very high in the moment that there is a 0 day and nobody knows about it. Or very few people know about it, and those people are very dangerous because they have a key that nobody else knows exists. So this is very dangerous. Also, when the vulnerability is disclosed publicly, if there is still no patch, this is even more dangerous because at this point, everybody and their dog know about the existence of the vulnerability. So everybody's scrambling to try to defend the systems, but until you have a patch, you don't have a full defense for the system. You can only stop gap. So if you are a vendor, or even if you are a user, what you would love to see is this, the discovery by the vendor, to happen before anybody else finds it, or at very least to happen as early as possible. And you want this patch to be released, if at all possible, before the vulnerability is disclosed publicly. So to bring this back, how do you bring those two things back? What do you need to do to bring those two things back? You need to do two things. You need to discover the vulnerability as early as possible as a vendor. And you need, since most of the times, at least in the beginning, most of the times, the vulnerability is going to be reported to you by someone like Ivan. What do you want to actually be able to do? What do you want that person to do? When that person reports the vulnerability to you, you begin working on a patch, right? So what do you want to have? What do you want? What's your best interest? Your best interest is to bring back this vulnerability discovery to as early as possible. And also to bring this patch release before the vulnerability disclosure publicly. So what do you need to do with security researchers if you want to do these two things? Come on, guys. I know that there is a camera, but just pretend to be my students for a while. What do you want to do if you're a vendor? What's in your best interest? One, convince the person that has given you the vulnerability to actually hold on for a few days, few weeks, whatever time you need, before publicly announcing them. You don't want to tell them, well, I sue you. You want to tell them, OK, let's work together here. We need time to patch this, so please hold on. When we release the patch, we will credit you. And then you can disclose, after a few days or a week or whatever, you can disclose all the details. You get the credit. We get the patch done. Our customers get protected. That's one thing you want to do. And the other thing is you want to actually invite as many people as possible to send you reports of vulnerabilities as early as possible, because that is going to dry out a little bit the reserve of vulnerabilities for those people that are not going to tell you. You cannot control how early other people, bad people, let's say, will find those exploits. So what you can do is invite all of the people that are actually willing to share those with you to share those as early as possible. You don't want to sue them. You want to hire them. That's the turning point It has not happened because of chance. It has not happened because vendors are particularly inherently good. It happens because it makes a lot of sense, business sense. You don't want to fight it. You actually want those people to give you those information and get all of the credit, all of the visibility. You actually want them to be publicly credited for doing that. Now, if you want to look at an empirical study of how often vulnerabilities are exploited before they are actually known, there is this beautiful paper by my friend Leila Bilge that basically analyzes that. Leila at the time worked for Symantec, went through the Symantec data set of all of the telemetry of all of their antiviruses, firewalls, devices that they have around the world. And what she said is, OK, I picked these vulnerabilities. I look at the date those vulnerabilities were notified to the vendor. And I look back in the data if they were used before being notified to the vendor. And that paper beautifully measures that. I have some data that is more recent than that, still from the Symantec report. So in 2015, there were at least 5 different CVs, so 5 different software vulnerabilities for major software that were exploited as 0 days, that were found to have been exploited before we knew it. This is not uncommon. Most of the other vulnerabilities were exploited very few days after the patch. Why, in your opinion? Because when the patch is released, what is a patch? What does a patch contain? Perfect. But specifically, the patch is an update, as you said. The update changes the software to correct the error. So if you look at the update, you have the description of the error. So if you invert the update, if you look at the update and you actually reverse engineer out the error, you have the description of the exploit. So when a patch comes out, it's important for people to apply it as fast as possible because the patch is actually also often a blueprint for the exploit. OK? So what happened? How did the vendors turn around from the lawsuit to working with the researchers? Well, this is an example. So this is a bar tip from Microsoft at Black Hat in 2004. Black Hat is kind of the largest technical conference on security. It happens every year in August in Las Vegas. And basically, I still have the invitation for that party. It's a card, and it says, with many thanks for helping us secure our products. We will sue you. Many thanks for helping us secure our products. Here's a drink ticket. That's the difference. But the difference did not come out of nothing. It came out of good business sense. If you are a vendor, those people invited there are the people that you want to work with you and not against you. So that's the reason why things like this happen. That's the reason why the tide turned, why the vendors began to work with security researchers. Those are the years of that increase in the vulnerability trend. And then can you see that there is a drop? There is a drop. Not just there is a drop, which is weird, right? What happened? We exhausted vulnerabilities. There is a drop, and if we were able to break down this graph, not by just the number of vulnerabilities, but by type, you would see that a certain type of vulnerabilities, the vulnerabilities that actually give you access from remote to operating systems, would actually drop to almost 0 in that same period. So not only the total number would go down, but the number of most serious vulnerabilities would actually drop even further. What happened there was the so-called anti-disclosure movement. Well exemplified, and I'm sure that Dino will hate me for this, by my friend Dino that is over there, holding up a sign saying, no more free bugs. What does no more free bugs mean? The other person in the picture is also a friend of mine, Alex Sotirov. But Dino is going to be more vocal with me about this. no more free bugs is a spirit. It's a spirit that pervaded the people that were actually very good at looking for bugs. And those are two of the best people that I know at looking for bugs. Because basically, what had changed in the industry? The industry was now structured, right? The software security issue was well recognized. Vendors had security programs in place. They were actually hiring security people, creating internal processes, getting external vendors to set up their testing teams, and so on and so forth. And so at that point, the people that were very good at looking for bugs did not need the credit anymore. You know that small cartoon saying you did this for visibility, like being paid in visibility. So being paid in visibility is good until a certain point. Then at a certain point, it doesn't make good business sense anymore. So doing the bug analysis for the vendors for free, at that point, didn't really make that much sense anymore. Of course, there is still people that are reporting bugs to the vendors for free. Of course, there is still people that need the credibility, that need the visibility to enter the field. If you are a very young researcher and you want to make yourself a name, you go to one of the competitions like Pwn to Own, which is a competition where you basically break into a system to get it. And you do that not for getting the system, which is actually very low value in generic terms, but to demonstrate what you're able to do. You give up one of your vulnerabilities, one of your exploits, to show that you're able to find them. Because that's a profession, right? Finding security vulnerabilities is a profession. It needs to be paid. It needs to be part of paid assessment, of paid jobs. So what no more free bugs means is not no more free bugs in general, but do not rely as an industry on free bug discovery. That's not free. That's a service that needs to be paid. And that's very true. And there's a lot of companies that do that. So it's a very true thing. So what happened is that the full disclosure kind of toned it down a little bit, because this became an actual profession, an actual mechanism for doing money. This is not the only thing that happened, though. Another thing happened. If you find an exploit, say an exploit to get into Windows systems from remote, who can be interested in knowing about that exploit? Care to guess? First, Microsoft, right. Second, people who want to use the exploit. Thank you very much. That's a way to do petitio principii and ask me the same question. So who are the people that want to use the exploit? Who can be the people, examples of people that want to use the exploit? Come on, guys. It's full of them on the newspapers these days. So let's say non-governmental organizations, terrorists, fine. Non-governmental organizations that are opposed to some or some other things in general, but yeah, terrorists, fair enough. But unfortunately, I would say terrorists do not really do that. They make other things blow up, usually. Computers have backups, so it would be marginally better than blowing up people. In some cases, it's not completely true. It's just. So other things? Competitors of the software vendor could be interested in that. That's true. Maybe a little bit of a marginal case. But more in the area of terrorists or bad guys. Who could be interested? Government organizations, intelligence agencies. If you are an intelligence agency or a signal intelligence organization, hey, that's your bread and butter right there. Ways to get communication of other people. And just to be completely clear, there's no ethical judgment in what I'm going to say today. I'm just going to lay out the facts, okay? Not supporting, not doing any other thing. As my friend Katie Moussouris, who is going to appear later on the slides, as said once, hackers gonna hack, vendors gonna vend, spies are going to spy. Everybody does their job. So it's not a surprise that an organization such as the NSA or any other spy organization will do this. It's their job. It's what they're paid to do. It's what they've been doing for a very long time. It's kind of one of the world's oldest professions. I'll let you to guess what the other ones are. So what happened over the years is that a black market of exploits developed. So once again, I'm going to make a lot of enemies with this broadcast. The person over here is a person that I consider a friend. His name is the Grug. It's obviously not his real name. And the Grug is a hacker myth. He's been a hacker for a very long time. He's been publishing documentation. If you guys are going to come to the computer forensics class as well, you will find that we will study some of the things that the Grug made. So some of his technical contributions. Now, in this photo comes from a Forbes article. Forbes is a huge business magazine. So this is not secret. He gave an interview in Forbes saying, yes, I work as an exploit broker. I buy exploits from people. I sell them to other people. Unsurprisingly, he lives in Thailand, not outside the law enforcement arm of most law enforcement organizations of the world. So he actually gave that interview and kind of like lifted the veil, a very thin veil, because a lot of people already knew that this was happening behind the scenes, on the existence of a market of exploits that is not necessarily, the slide says black market, but the guy has gone publicly on record saying, I'm doing this, because not all of this market is black. Probably what he does is white. Is doing this as a job, transferring software from one person to another. Or if you want, gray area. It's kind of difficult stuff, but not necessarily the sales of an exploit are illegal or even ethically disputable. This is a very difficult subject. It's not fit for one class, and it's not fit for a class that is going to be recorded in any case. So a market of exploit has been created, in part white, in part on the record, or just slightly off the record, and in part black. The real black, not the thing that the Grug does. There's going to be people somewhere that are poor or desperate enough to sell exploits to people that you shouldn't probably sell exploits to, which is a kind of a very long list. But at the top of those lists, there are the guys that were mentioned before, like terrorist organizations. And we should not be deluded. Even if people that actually go on the record will not sell to them, it's in their best interest not to sell to them. There's going to be someone who's going to sell to them. There is a market. There's a buyer. There's going to be sellers. Also because the vulnerabilities and exploits that are really dangerous can have significantly high prices. The typical price of a remote exploit in commonly used system is quoted by different sources. You can look around on the internet and you can find different numbers. But they all are around 150 to 200,000 euros. Actually, a company a few months ago, a company called Zerodium, which is another broker of exploits that is on the record. They do this officially. That's their official business. They offered $1 million for a remote exploit in iOS. Fully remote chain of exploits for compromising an iOS device from remote. Someone claimed the price, reportedly. So there is a market. There is a need. There are a lot of people looking to buy. And there are also a lot of people, well, not really a lot, but there is a number of people that are able to sell. So there's going to be a market, no matter what you do. Wherever there's people willing to buy and people willing to sell, and there is these figures involved, there's going to be a market. So if you are a vendor, what is the best thing that you can do to try to stem a little bit this market. This market is going to be there. It's always going to be there. But what can you do to try to dry it up a little bit? Go ahead. Look to what bid the buyer. Perfect. Exactly. You want to buy those vulnerabilities off the market. Can you offer $1 million for a vulnerability? Probably not. Well, if you are Apple, probably yes. But still, if you cannot really outbid all of these buyers. But you can create a channel for people to gain money while doing the right thing. Yes, you can get $150,000 for that, or you can get a little bit less, but hey, in the clear and doing the right thing. That's creating an alternative. Most people actually, well, many people are inherently, oriented to do the right thing, regardless of the pay. But that's easier if you have a job and you have a living wage. If you don't have a job and you don't have a living wage, doing the right thing can actually be kind of difficult at times. So giving people a way to do the right thing and at the same time to get paid for their effort, it's actually a good idea. That idea is called a bug bounty. So this is Microsoft that actually does not really offer a bug bounty in the technical sense of the word, not for single vulnerabilities. They offer a bug bounty for techniques to protect binaries or techniques to attack binaries. So classes of vulnerabilities or of exploitation techniques. But the bug bounty is actually significant. For a protection against a class of vulnerabilities or a class of exploitation techniques, you can get up to $200,000 of bug bounty from Microsoft. And surprisingly, the person structuring it, his picture over there, was my friend Katie Moussouris, who then moved on to become the chief policy officer of a company called HackerOne that is actually, which in Italian reads like Hackerone, which sounds very terrible, I told her. But HackerOne actually is a company who is in this business. They create bug bounty programs for other companies. If you are a software vendor and you need a bug bounty program, these guys are going to create one for you. Now Katie has actually left HackerOne, I should mention, and she's on her own. So that's the update. But still, it has happened like 3 days ago. But still, from the existence, so lawsuits. If you find a vulnerability, I'll sue you. If you find a vulnerability, I'll pay you a drink in Vegas. If you find a vulnerability, please report it to me. I will actually give you money. I create your bounty. There exists a company, actually there are at least 2. The other is called BugCrowd, that create programs for acquisition of vulnerabilities by companies, that outsource the creation of bug bounty programs for companies. So this is an example of page from bugcrowd.com. You can go there, you can register. They have a list of companies that pay bounties through them. You go, you download that type of software. If you find a vulnerability in that type of software, you report it through BugCrowd, and you get paid. BugCrowd basically evaluates the vulnerability, checks that it's true before passing it to the company and before paying you. So they are doing, in an outsourced way, the handling of the bug hunting for the companies. And if you go to bugcrowd.com, you will actually find a lot of customers. If you go to hackerone.com, you will find a lot of customers. There's a lot of companies that are doing this right now, to try to offer a legal, ethically sound way to report a vulnerability that you found without actually having to go on the black market. Obviously, if you look at the figures for these things, they are not readable there, but they are in the ranges of the hundreds or the thousands, or at most the tens of thousands. The bug bounty by Microsoft, 200,000, is actually kind of one of the large ones. So they are orders of magnitude less than most of the figures that are on the black market. But still, you have the additional thing that you are doing the right thing, and you can actually earn that money in a very legal way. OK, so this is where we are now. This is where we are now. Where are we going to do next? Where are we going to go next? It's actually up for thinking. It's actually up for thinking. If you have participated in a conference organized by Paul, you may have heard me talking about regulation of the trade of exploits and about the fact that these exploits trade actually have a reflex on global policy. At the moment, cyber warfare is touted as a possibility, so cyberspace is thought of as another domain of war besides land, sea, air, and space. So when the first atomic bomb was detonated in Los Alamos, someone famously quoted that physics had lost its innocence, that became a weapon of war. It's not true, because physics was a weapon of war since the first arrow was designed to fly. But still, that was a very famous quote. Computer science was born out of Turing's effort to break codes during World War II. So our innocence kind of has been lost very early. We are actually in a trend to lose more of that innocence right now. So if you are computer scientists, if you're going to be software engineers, security engineers, as you are going to be, probably, some of you at least, the ones that survived this class, you will probably want to look into these issues, because these are the ethical issues of our profession. Every profession has ethical issues. Doctors have ethical issues in how they develop and distribute medicines. We have ethical issues in how we design software for our users and how this software can be abused for things like waging war. I will not go deeply into that. So going back on track to our course, what are some of the issues? What are some of the patterns that we will look at? Some of the things that break into software, some of the key issues in designing secure software. One of these issues we have already seen. Design the software so that its privileges are kept to a minimum. The privileged parts are as small as possible. The privileges are as low as possible. Why? Because if the software cannot do it, you cannot break it to make it do it. Even if you can break it, you can't make it what the software is not enabled to do. The second principle is a principle that we violate constantly. This is the principle that engineers should live by, and we violate it constantly. It's called KISS, just like KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. Whenever we design a system, the system must be as simple as possible. And I can 100% guarantee you, if there is one thing, one immutable law that I have seen, and I've been doing security for 18 years now. So if there's one immutable thing, one thing that always works, is if you look at something and it's complicated, if you don't understand it at first glance, it's going to break. If it's not simple, it's going to break. This is, if I have to choose one immutable law of security, is this. If it's too complex, it's going to break. But this is an immutable law of engineering, really. If it's too complex, it's going to break. There is actually a version of it that is a part of the set of the Murphy's laws that says that the only thing that is different between something that can break and something that is unbreakable is that when something that is supposedly unbreakable actually breaks, it's usually too complex to repair. Keep it simple. If it's simple, you can scrutinize it. If you can scrutinize it, maybe it will not be secure, but there's a very good possibility that it's going to be secure enough. Open design. You remember the Kerckhoff principle, which we talked about in cryptography. The Kerckhoff principle applies across different security disciplines. If you need to keep the recipe of your security system secret, it means that it's a shitty system. I should not say that on camera. Concurrency and race conditions. When you have developed your first concurrent program, like for distributed systems or for any other course with concurrent programming, you have found out how damn difficult it is to make those different threads, those different processes actually run in the right sequence, or actually to design them so that they cannot possibly run in the bad sequence. This is so commonly a problem in security that it actually has its own name as a vulnerability class, a race condition. Vulnerabilities where two things are supposed to happen in a certain order, and they almost always happen in that order, but if you are a bad guy enough, you can make them happen in a different order, and actually that creates a vulnerability. So every time you see concurrency in a system, which is basically every system that we use, concurrency creates complexity. Complexity creates issues. We will not be able to see race conditions during the course, but if you pick up the Shell Coder's handbook, you will find exploitation of race conditions in there. Or you can just Google for race conditions and you will find gazillions of examples, because this is a very common vulnerability class. Also vulnerability class that is difficult to exploit, to be fair. Another typical key issue, fail-safe. Software, when it fails, should fail shut, not fail open. It's not like the doors of a building. If they are electrified, you want them to fail open. If there is no power, they are the only way to get out. You want them to actually allow people to open them from the inside. But a door from the outside should fail open. If you cut power to a door that is closed electronically, it should not open from the outside. It should fail and stay closed. And the same can be said for systems. Systems should fail in a closed state. They should allow you access if everything works out perfectly. They should fail to a closed state. If you fail, you let people locked out. Shared things. We, modern software engineers, rarely, we software engineers, as if I were a software engineer. There's people that could kill me for that. We rarely develop things from scratch. We build them upon libraries and upon the use of system resources. All of these shared things introduce attack surface in our system. Do you remember the concept of boundaries that we saw at the first lesson? At some point, you need to stop your analysis of the vulnerabilities of the system. Well, whenever you include something in your program, you are importing their vulnerabilities and their profile of security into your program. So if you are using shared libraries, you should be wary of what these libraries actually give you back as a result. If you are using shared resources of the system, you should think that the system may not be the trustworthy thing that you are thinking of. If you are using, for instance, just a temporary file, you cannot think, OK, I will just create a file and then store my stuff on it. And when I read it, it's going to be the same stuff that I stored. Because that file, is on the system. It is shared. It can be accessed by others. So you need to take care of how that file is created, locked, and then released. Use of shared things is a key issue in secure design. And then there is, like, as we will see, the next few lessons, we will always work on this. This is kind of the single enormous blinking flashlight sign of secure design. If you don't remember anything else of these principles, remember this one. You need to filter the input and the output of programs. A program does not work in isolation. It gets input and it prints output. Those interfaces are the ones where an aggressor will work on your program. So everything that is taken in input and everything that is printed in output is the things that you should focus your attention on. Actually, there is a movement called LangSec, language security, langsec.org, that maintains that most, if not all, of the vulnerabilities of software can be dealt with by actually not designing input routines in a ad hoc way, so you just design your own input routine for that specific input that you are handling, but thinking of each input routine as of a parser. You are parsing a language. If you develop this as a parser, it's going to be safe. If you look at that website, if you look at those papers, you will find that this is a very fascinating angle to software security. So if you are interested in software security, you may want to look at those papers. Also, another typical design issue is writing your own crypto code. Whenever you see someone writing crypto code, unless they are writing a crypto library that is very famous and used by a lot of people, and they are very famous too, they are probably doing a mistake. Not in the sense that they are doing something wrong specifically, but they are doing a mistake in writing their own code for crypto. You don't write your own code for crypto because that's difficult to write. It's difficult to write even for experts, so you just use code that has already been written for you. Just like you don't devise your own encryption algorithm. You use algorithms that are standard. And you use also implementations of those algorithms that are standard. Because even if you are using a standard algorithm, if you fail at the implementation, and there's millions of ways to fail at the implementation, it's very difficult to get the implementation of an encryption algorithm completely right. If you fail at the implementation, the algorithm can be still safe, but your implementation can suck all the same. Okay, so in conclusion, we have said several different things. We have said we cannot really achieve bug-free software. So, since bugs that affect a security principle are vulnerabilities, we cannot achieve vulnerability-free software. But we already knew that, right? We knew that from the first class. We are not able to create vulnerability-free stuff. We cannot create secure stuff. We can create secure enough stuff. How do we create secure enough stuff? We create secure enough stuff through scrutiny, through analysis. How do we get analysis done on systems? We have seen the sequence of the analysis done on systems. We have seen starting from people trying to get the message through and getting bounced back, to this message of analysis of vulnerabilities being widely accepted, to the actual existence of bug bounties and vulnerability and exploits market. Now, in conclusion, I would like to share a point of view that has been made, and a point that has been made by one of the most respected and most savvy security gurus on the planet, Dan Geer. Dan is the chief security officer of In-Q-Tel. In-Q-Tel is the investment arm of CIA. Dan has been a security professional at the top level for his whole lifetime. And he's an amazing speaker. You can find his talks. And in particular, in a keynote talk he gave at Black Hat a couple of years ago. Look for it. Look for it. There's the video recording of it. Look for it. Listen to all of it. Listen to all of it. It's worth it. It's worth more than all of the classes that I do in my course. Listen to all of it. So in one point of this keynote, he said a very important and interesting thing. And the question that I leave you with, you can think about it, we can discuss it tomorrow, is this. So if I have a piece of software and I take away a few vulnerabilities, so if I do vulnerability discovery, bug bounty, bug hunting, to all penetration testing, all the things that we have discussed, when I'm done doing that thing, when I found a vulnerability and resolve it, is this software more secure than before? And the answer that Dan gives is different from the answer that I would have given. And the answer is this. It depends on one thing. It depends on how dense we think vulnerabilities are in software. If we think vulnerabilities are dense, so that there are many, many vulnerabilities in software and they keep being introduced, then that does not change a bit. We have taken away our vulnerabilities, there are a gazillion more. Like an hydra. You cut a head, there's 2 more heads popping up. If we think that the vulnerabilities are sparse, then actually killing vulnerabilities one at a time, while not bringing the software to be perfect, because we know that it will never be perfect, is actually going to make it more secure. So at the end of the day, the question, the real question in software security is, are vulnerabilities sparse or dense? Dan went on his, on his thinking, saying that while he didn't have proof, his perception was that vulnerabilities are dense. So this is not really making the software more secure. You can think about it, and we can discuss it in class tomorrow morning.